Hello, my name is Maria Victoria Hidalgo, and we are here with Charlotte Kirby and Brain Corrigan. Charlotte, Brain, would you like to present yourselves?
Hi, I'm Charlotte. I'm a senior at Kenyon and I'm from the East Coast and I am a Spanish major.
All right.
I'm Bryn. I'm a sophomore psychology major, and I'm from outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
It's such an honor to have you here, guys, and so we can discuss about the topic, the podcast of the topic of the podcast of today. That it is how do young Ecuadorian voters from 16 to 21 manage to understand what their vote means when they haven't got enough or even a minimum of political education? So, having said that, I would like to give you guys an introduction about what this means and how are we going to start with the questions for the podcast. So, first of all, welcome and thank you for joining us today. And well, we'll delve into how political literacy is shaped here in Ecuador, both in schools and through other influences such as family, media, and social networks. So we aim to better understand how young voters navigate the political landscape despite limited formal education and how that might compare to experiences here in the US, well, there in the US. So we hope this discussion will shed light on the importance of civic education and empowering future voters. As you know, well, here in Ecuador, it was this is called facultative vote, that it means that you can vote when you are 16. It means that if you want to, you can vote, but if you don't, it doesn't matter. It's not an obligation since you are not 18. Okay, so the first question that I want to ask you is what were your thoughts or some of your thoughts when you were 16? What was on your mind?
Um, are you talking in direct relation to like what was on my mind about as just in general
Oh
or
yeah, yeah,
like
in general. I mean, later we're gonna get into politics a little bit more, but
mm,
at 16, what was on your mind? Like in high school, what were you thinking, your main thoughts?
um so this I guess my answer to this question is when I like think about my time in high school. I grew up in Washington, D.C., which is the capital of the U.S. and also where the White House is and where our government and like the everything kind of functions, like the government, the center of sort of government in the U.S., at least like the national government. So for me, I think I was really politically engaged in high school. I remember like there was a lot of like debating in my high school about different policies or issues with America in terms of um, racism and poverty. Like there was a lot. We were having very intense conversations, almost more so than I have now as a college student
Okay.
at Kenyon, which is really interesting, and I don't think a lot of people's experience. But then also on the other hand, at 16, I was 16. And so I was also just thinking about myself and trying to get my homework done and um, not necessarily,
Something that
probably,
has to do with politics.
yeah,
Yeah, I
I
think it's
think,
true.
I think on the one hand, I was super politically engaged, but on the other hand, um, thought I was smarter than I actually was. If that makes any
Oh,
sense,
yeah,
right?
it does. It does. And it happened.
Yeah. And so I think I was naive in some ways, but also like super into politics.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get it. Like it was not your main focus, but it was there because you
Yeah.
lived on the capital. But you, Bryn, you didn't live there. What were some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I was kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. I was focused on my friends and drama and then like schoolwork and sports. I Politics weren't really something that I paid attention to except for when I would see like people post on Instagram about that sort of thing, like about politics and different like infographics about it. And I would see that, but that was kind of that and my parents, like their opinions were kind of my only exposure to politics.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have to agree with you because I did like when I was 16, I was thinking about maybe what I want to do in college. And if I want, yeah, yeah, we have all the things in mind. And do you think that when you were 16 or maybe 18 when you have to vote, um, do you think ever cross your mind what really means voting? Like when it was 18, your first time voting, or when you were 16?
Again, I think I remember my English teacher, and we actually had a civics class in high school that I took. And the conversation around voting was One, if you don't vote, you are perhaps letting down your fellow Americans. You are letting down your country. You are to not vote. I think is the discussion in high school was framed as something that sort of was like the worst thing, that like to not be
that you could
politically,
do.
yeah, like to not be politically engaged, to not understand what was going on, to not read the news, to not read books was basically a travesty and like a huge problem in America. And if you are going to say anything at all, you should at least be engaged politically somewhat. And
Okay.
so then, even more than now, admittedly, like voting for me felt like I knew it was a big deal. It was like, it was always framed that way for me in my high school classes. And my friends are super and are continue to be super engaged in politics. And so I just think that there was this kind of like rhetoric around politics and voting as being something that is like almost of the utmost importance
Okay.
to a U.S. citizen.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, it's I like listening you to hearing you saying that right now, it shows the difference between Ecuador and the US, because here I have never heard a teacher talking about voting. It's like it's something that you do or you don't, but you never hear like a teacher saying, "Oh, you guys should vote because it's one of your rights," first, and second because it's also your decision. We don't have that kind of patriotic, what would I say, like soul, that patriotic soul as you guys have, because I know that you are very patriotic, your country, and that's what I like about it. Yeah, but I don't know, Rin, if I told you that Ecuador we don't have like non political education, and I'm telling you that at 16, younger men and women vote, what would you think about that?
Well, honestly, me and Charlotte have very different experiences in high school. I think maybe part of that is because she grew up in Washington, D.C., and like where I grew up, like a suburb of Philadelphia, it I mean, you were told that you should vote, but also when you're younger, no one's really involved politically. Um, there was like Model UN and student government, but that was kind of not super big at my school. And I think teachers never really told me to vote. I mean, mostly because by the time I was old enough to vote, I was a senior in high school. And also, I think I went to public school, so teachers really tried to stay away from politics and not bring that up because they could get in a lot of trouble for doing that. So I feel like it wasn't really, I mean, my parents kind of pushed voting on me and they told me I need to vote and be involved, but this election right now is the first time I'm voting. I mean, I'm 19, so this is the second election that I'm able to vote in, and this is the first one that I'm actually going to, because this one feels like matters more to me than like just the senator, or I don't even know what the other one, the local elections.
Yeah, well, it's yeah, I think if we would have, to be honest, if we would have the option, like if we want to choose, we want to vote or not, I think more than the 50% of my country of Ecuador would not vote. I'm completely sure about that. But that's everything that we know, because in education we haven't had that kind of developed thing about politics. We do not have that education about this is it, this terms means this, or voting means this, not in our country, but in general. And it's because, yeah, our education system is, I think, trying to develop still. We don't have, I can't say that we have a really great public school system, because sadly we don't. Many of our books in public schools have grammar misspellings, have typos, and it's like a big issue here. At least that if you don't have a private education, sometimes you don't have a good education, and that's something that, yeah, here in Ecuador we should work in. But yeah, it's a social issue as I mentioned before, and that's why I want to ask you guys: do you think that it will be easy or difficult for young voters to understand political promises if they never had a formal political education before?
Um, do you want to go, Charlotte, or should I?
Yeah, sure, I can go. I think it's really like if we look at today, I feel like a lot of politics is catchphrases. Um, it's politicians dumbing down into very complicated issues into and nuanced issues into something that seems really simple and isn't,
Yeah.
in order to sort of sway and win voters. And so in order to like cast an educated vote, you have to have a good background knowledge in many ways. You have to be able to see past those generalizations, those slogans, and you have to understand in many ways like history and current situations. I think college has really helped me with that.
Yeah, it
But
does.
high school too, just having like a general idea of how politics works, um, and having political discussions. And so I think without that, politicians are able to sway voters by whatever sounds the best, and they're allowed to, in many ways, like manipulate the population a lot easier.
Yeah, that can
Um,
happen a lot. Sure.
and I think that could be especially true with young voters. In some ways, it's a lot of pressure to put on young voters,
Yeah.
but an access to education around the issue would be like a really good start, I think.
I agree a lot with Charlotte. I think it's without a political education and like understanding how to maybe dive deeper into what politicians are saying and things like they can just claim whatever they want to claim and it doesn't really have to be true. And if you don't have the education and the resources to like challenge those statements um, and like do more research on it, then I think you can easily be manipulated, especially young voters who don't have the experience, especially if they haven't had the real world experience that would like teach them how to do their own research and they aren't getting it from school. They really have nowhere to learn information from other than just to believe the statements that politicians are making or what their parents say.
Yeah, exactly. And now you're talking about this. Do you think that if political education will be more available to young people, would they be more engaged with politics? Do you think they will be more willing to or eager to know about Ecuadorian politics or politics around the world, how they work, how they matter?
Yeah, I think so. I had a civics class in 10th grade that the goal of the class was simply to outline how the like American government worked, federal government, state government, like how does all of that work, and the history of it and how it came about. And what ended up happening in that class is, yes, we learned all those things and that was helpful. But I think the most helpful or the most engaging part of that class was the discussions that came out of it, the debates that got really intense, the articles that we would read in that class from places like the New York Times, Washington Post, which are big newspapers in the US. And it just provided this place to talk about current issues that are occurring in the US and look at the history of those issues. And all of my classmates were super engaged in that class. It was one where we could share our opinions and one that encouraged us to like be politically engaged. And I think that really kickstarted the sort of beginnings of any political consciousness that I had in high school.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's great. I think yeah, I had like kind of a same experience, but not in school. It was in a with my family. Actually, it was in a dinner table. We were eating, obviously, and my dad started talking about politics and about how he doesn't like this candidate that later become president. And he was talking about it, and I realized how much I wanted to know as much as he knows, like how much I want to be able to debate about a topic without like just having to sit silent and listen to the debate, be willing to participate in it, be having the information that he has, having his 30 something years, and me being a 16-year-old kid that can vote and that is also able to talk to knows what he or she is talking about. So I think it's interesting. I don't know, Ray, what would you have to say about this, Ren?
I agree with everything you're saying. Like I've been feeling that way a lot recently. Um, I think when you don't know or you feel like you don't know enough about politics and it gets brought up, and then I recently kind of educated myself on um this coming election and stuff like that. But I think when you don't know enough and people are talking about it and they sound really knowledgeable about the subject, like you kind of wish that you could just do research really quick and not have to sit there silently because I feel like I'm always scared that I'm gonna say something that's wrong, and I don't think I, like, feel confident enough in myself and my own knowledge just to kind of, debate with other people. So, I think that is a really, really common issue for a lot of young voters, especially who haven't had the, political education, like, background in high school or growing up or however you get it. Um, I think if you don't have that education and you haven't done your own research, it kind of shuts you down and makes you not want to be well, it could take you either way, like, you could either be inspired and want to do your own research, or you could just shut down and be silent during those conversations and, I don't know, feel like I don't it yeah, I just agree with what you're saying a lot, like, I really resonate with that.
Yeah, well, and imagine now that you're saying this, like imagine how the like million of teenagers, 16 guys or are feeling right now, maybe are feeling like us, like maybe they are willing to have the resources to get educated about politics, but they can't. Maybe and right now with the power outrages, they don't have the resources, they can go online, they can read a book because or public libraries are not like too able to give you that information. They are not stock filled with books. They are not. So I think it's really a big issue here in Ecuador. And you giving that right to a teenager is really a big responsibility. And I think, I don't know you guys, but in my belief, I think that most of this information they're getting or this preparation they're getting for voting is from their family, mostly their friends, or even social media, where you, Charlotte, mentioned that there's like slogans that try to make you resonate with them. And it's just like populism talking, like trying to relate with an issue that they have never been related with, these big candidates. What would you say?
Um, so what's your question exactly?
Like, do you think they're really getting this information from family, friends, or even social media? Like, because yeah, they don't have this education where they can say, yeah, I learned it from here.
yeah,
Because I think that's the way it is. Mostly in the like today's generation, that's how we work through social media and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter.
yeah. I think I think that's totally true. I think especially young voters and young people everywhere in the United States, probably in Ecuador, are getting a lot of their information from what is handed down to them from family, from friends, and from the internet. And I think the internet and like social media can be a great place actually to like in in certain cases like learn about issues that you've never even heard of or have never even thought about because you have access to people who have very different experiences than you. Um, However, there are obviously a lot of drawbacks with getting your information from social media because it becomes like an echo chamber essentially. The algorithm is feeding you things that you want to see,
Yeah,
right? And so you're
sure.
going to get information that obviously on social media information that could be false, or you are not going to see um, the other side of the argument
Yeah,
ever.
you'll be biased on what they are feeding you with. Yeah.
Yeah. And also the internet and social media is also prone to giving you a shorter, condensed, um, slogan-esque form of information on politics, right? A bullet points on an infographic or something like that. Um, I think so. I think in some ways, social media can be a really great place to sort of begin this like political curiosity, but only when it comes from and is talking about issues that maybe we've never heard of that you look into more, um, but not a place where your research or political thinking should end, and also not something that you should essentially take with a grain of salt, not believe fully as it is presented.
Yeah. Okay. Bryn?
Um, yeah, well, I agree. I think like back to like what you were saying earlier, like when I was 16, I kind of got all my information like politically from those infographics, like on Instagram. My friends would like post them or something, and I'd be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But I think they're kind of more I think like you can say whatever you want to say on social media. And I mean, as 16-year-old will probably believe it. And so like those infographics that yeah, like are kind of dumbing down everything. And they may also be like stretching the truth and not completely accurate and maybe more extreme. And I think like getting your only information from there is definitely a big issue.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, as you said, I believe that I was a kind of like informed teenager. I like to think of myself like that because my dad was like a lot into politics. But it's still, when I got into college, I realized that I have a lot to learn. Like a lot, because then I realized what really was communism, what really was socialism, what it means democracy, like in theoretical terms, what it was voting, how it started, how there are different systems and everything. Like you start opening your mind and realizing that the many candidates that are for presidency, they have different styles of doing things, and you start realizing like I want to vote for him, not because of what I saw on social media, but also because I'm resonating with what he's saying, what he is like talking about, or what he's like the paper that they have to send for in order to be president, what that is saying. And I think that what he's no, it's not texting, what he's writing, it's good for the country. It's good for us. It's gonna make you progress and all of those things. But I later started to think, yes, I do have that education. I go to a private college, a private university. What about the people that haven't got a private education in high school, are not familiar with this kind of themes, and also that haven't got to a private university that it's not as openly as mine because of the liberal arts thing. They have this, they tend to be biased by this. Some public universities tend to have this strong beliefs that capitalism or communism is the only two ways to go. So here in Ecuador, without having a primarily good education at high school, it's kind of hard, you know. And if you started to think that they can vote at 16 when they don't have a good political education, you started asking yourself, was that a good way to go? Like giving that kind of responsibility to a 16-year-old? So to finishing up with the podcast, I want to ask you, what would you say to the 16-year-old that are going to vote? What would you tell them in order to make them feel prepared to make a good decision?
Um, I think more than anything, this kind of goes back to education, but for me, I would tell that 16-year-old what my like teachers all through high school told me, encouraged me to do. Um, and that was to develop my critical thinking skills, right? To question things beyond face
Good.
value. I think, we talk about education and we talk about, um, we've been talking about like civic education and learning the difference in like political terms and like what this means and what that means. And those things are all important. But the other side of this kind of coin is also the development of like critical thinking, right? And like
Yeah, true.
understanding and questioning what you have been fed your entire life. And that begins to happen when you're a teenager and really accelerates as you like leave home sometimes and go to college, at least in the US. And I think at 16, in order to vote and to sort of like begin thinking politically, you have to encourage those students to think critically about their environment. But it's one of those things that you can't really tell a 16-year-old, okay, you got to vote tomorrow. Have some critical thought about who you're going to vote for, or even that, you got to vote in a couple months. I think it's something that has to be encouraged within the school system, right? That is an issue at least in the US, right? You're sort of like fed information and not necessarily, you're kind of told what to think, but not how to think. And so I think if I would have any advice for that 16-year-old, it would just be to try your best to think critically about this, right?
Yeah. Like have more thoughts than you are
Yeah.
just right now.
And when it's
Yeah, I get
right
it.
in front of you. But it's difficult because I think a lot of those skills and that knowledge, it has to be sort of developed throughout your life as a student,
Yeah, it
and
does.
beyond.
It has to.
Yeah.
It's true because you can, as you said, you can just go to a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old sometimes. Hey, like use your critical thinking. Like, what would you do in this situation? And that's it. You have to develop that because I think it's an ability. It's
Yeah.
a, because most people have better critical thinking than others. And that's because some of them have developed it in a better in like yeah, better ways. So yeah. What would you say, Brent?
Yeah, I one thing that my high school did really well is teach us how to critically think. That was like a big thing that we always did, and in every class that was kind of a theme. And I think that has benefited me a lot, like in college and in life, and especially when it comes to politics, by not just taking what people say as like the right answer, and kind of making sure that like I know enough where I like, or I don't know, like understanding their reasoning for what they're saying. I think that's really important when it comes to politics, but also like that's that's something that it is hard to tell a 16-year-old that you need to critically think, especially if their school hasn't really taught them like strategies to do like for how to do that. And you can tell them to do your research, but I mean, like they might not know where to start. So I think it's kind of difficult to give them a piece of advice when like I don't like the advice that I would give them, I don't know how they would go about like following that advice.
Yeah, and when you're 16, like you kind of think that you know it all. Like I know what's good for myself, and in reality, we really don't. We have no idea about the world, about how it works, about how different people are out there, and like mainly how politics work and how they rule our world completely. Like how much impact it has choosing one candidate or another, and how that will impact the next 4 years, not just in your country, but in the whole world. It's like, it's mind blowing, at least for me that I study international relations. It really like blows up my mind how that affects. Like just 1 month of a new presidency can change completely the dynamic in the world. And it's really interesting. And I would love other teenagers to know that, to know how important it is, you know? And yeah, well, thank you so much for being able to share your thoughts, girls. I think it has been a really nice podcast and a nice topic, nice, really things that we said. I find it amazingly interesting sharing a conversation with people from a different country and from your country. I really love your country. You have no idea how much I love the US. I think it's like one of the best countries. And yeah, I think that has a great deal of history about how their political and educational system has developed and formed. Um, throughout the years. So yeah, I look forward to have you here again and have a great day. And I'll see you in the next episode.